One example of this collision course that has, I believe, catered for a coach is Des Hasler at Gold Coast Titans. And I've been hinting at this all year, but I feel ready now to sort of say exactly what I heard very early in the year because it seems to have transpired. It became very apparent to me early in the year because there's players I've coached who played at the Titans and still do play at the Titans, so I know people. And they were telling me there was two very distinct camps at the Gold Coast Titans. Those that totally believe that what Des Hasler was doing was just what the team needed, and another half who thought it was too tough and that they were being spoken to in the wrong way. And that, if you think of the leadership group at the Titans, so the older experienced players, or the experienced players, the leaders, there was a split there as well, and two camps that formed underneath that. So we've had a conversation now whether Des's methods are old school. Now, I can't tell you how much Des has evolved or not evolved. The same thing happened with Madge Maguire at the Broncos, except they turned things around and they now could be top four in the NRL into the finals. But people were after him, and they seem to have calmed down somewhat now. This weekend, I was with Matthew Elliott, the old Bradford Bulls, Raiders, Canberra Raiders, New Zealand Warriors, and Penrith Panthers coach. I met him at Penrith Panthers, and he took me under his wing and brought me on board with the USA, and that's how my journey with the USA Tomahawks that ended up at the 2013 World Cup started. And we had a chat after the formalities of the event, which was his book launch. If you're interested in that, please let me know. Admin at rugbyleaguecoach.com.au. And after his book launch, we spoke about these changes of mindset because Matt Elliott doesn't necessarily want to be a head coach anymore. He still works in the game. He did some part-time work at the St. George Illawarra Dragons for a while. And he still hasn't ruled out being involved in the game. But I think we all agree it would be hard for him to be a head coach again in terms of what people perceive away from those who know Matthew Elliott. And the irony is, even though Matty's in his 60s and he's got grey hair and he's been at a few NRL clubs as coach and a Super League coach, Matt, I would say, has a modern way of doing things. There's a different way of doing things. And when I left Manly Seagulls to go to Penrith Panthers, it became very clear to me that I was going into a more modern coaching environment in terms of how you analyze the game and discuss things with players, okay? Not necessarily a more modern coaching environment in terms of sports science, because Des was known to be very scientific, if you like, in terms of his desired outcomes from a rugby league team. I would say Matthew Elliott was more artistic than Des Hasler, who was more science and scientific than Matthew Elliott. That's my perception anyway. Although I'm sure Des Hasler will, if he ever heard this, would go, I'm artistic in this way. And I'm sure Matthew Elliott would say, well, I'm scientific in this way, and this way, and this way. I just think if there's a leaning, that's where the two coaches would go. Matthew focused very heavily on games in training for conditioning and skill development during a pre-season and a season when Penrith had a really good year, and I was still of the age where I could join in and still compete with NRL players at that time. And I also learned from Matthew an extra focus on core skills, and the core skills thing were on another level. So much so that Matthew tried to really change the core skill levels of all the players. And one lesson he learned, and then it remained with me, was that Petro Sivanasiva, who was by now in his last contract of his career, was not going to change the way he grip, gripped, passed, caught and carried the football. He might do that in training, but as soon as it came to a game, he was going to carry it the way he's always carried it. And that comes down to repetition. That comes down to practice, the age at which you practice, the regularity with which you practice, and the habits you form at the core stages of your career. To the point where I think the last chance you can get a player and really change some of their habits before they become something that's ingrained is in that sort of 18 to 21 bracket. If you don't get them then and really work hard on changing habits, it becomes too ingrained. I remember there were gloves at Penrith that were designed to help players grip the ball. There was a glove with a sort of what I describe as half a ping pong ball in the middle of the palm on the glove. And these are things that even now I see people trying to sell these things to people and saying it's the first time ever. I saw this in 2010. There were off-season meetings to analyse trends in the game. There was GPS and heart rate monitors galore to analyse what players were doing in training. And in terms of evolving and changing and being conscious of that, it's worth remembering that more than a decade before that, Matthew Elliott coached Bradford Bulls to the Super League title in 1997. And that Bradford Bulls side just steamrolled the opposition because they were twice the size, twice the speed, and twice the power of everyone else. So that's a very different kind of approach to what happened and what he was trying to achieve at Penrith in terms of core skill, conditioning, mobility, if you like. So they're the kind of things I learned off Matthew, and it was great to see him this weekend and catch up with him and challenge the status quo, if you like, or think about challenging the status quo. I also met Tony Priddle, and I vaguely remembered this name, and I had to ask him a few more questions to ascertain his place in the Rugby League pantheon. He was the prop that played for St. George in the 1992 and 93 grand finals, the two that they lost to the Brisbane Broncos. And he had a 5-year career, I believe, at St. George, and then went to Paris Saint-Germain and played in the Paris Saint-Germain side that played in the Super League. So fantastic outcomes, fantastic career, and far more of a career than many, many people achieve. He's now an NLP trainer. And for those who don't know what NLP is, it's neuro-linguistic programming, which is basically coaching people how to think and changing how they think. And his favorite saying is, the mental game is the game. And we had a massive conversation over snacks and non-alcoholic drinks. I went in and bragged. I said, I've not had a drink for 8.5 weeks. He said, I've not had one for 18 months. So first conversation I had with him, I said, mate, you've just put me down. You've just made me feel inadequate. First conversation. And he was talking about how some clubs just refuse a conversation with a mental coach, if you like, a neuro-linguistic programmer. Just can't get past the front door. And I shared with him a story about one particular coach I had a discussion with this week who's playing a very, very, very big game pretty much as I record this podcast. Win and they're premiers, lose and they're not. I said to him during the meeting, we talked about the messaging. I said, pretend I'm one of your players in the shed. Pretend I'm playing prop for you now. I'm in the shed with you just before kickoff. Half an hour before kickoff. Tell me what you're going to say. And he said, and I won't get this word for word because I tried to write down what he said. He said, I want you lads to channel your intensity, forget about any points or anything like that. Just focus on doing your job and do it well. I know there's a lot of anticipation in this room. You've got to run harder and tackle harder than the opposition. Focus on your one percenters and the rest follows. And then he said something about, he came up with some phrase about saying, the 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration, or whatever. I can't even remember what it is. And then he started talking about statics. And I listened to that and I said, mate, stop. I've been writing down that so much. I think I've missed some, and that's going to be too much for your players. And we took out the saying about channeling intensity and forgetting about the points. And this is what I'm saying in my initial thing about the only focus on the positives. Don't think positively. Don't even mention anything else. Talk to them about doing their job and doing it well. Give them belief. So remind them why they are successful. All you need to do is do it one more time. All you need to do is do your job as well as you can for the very last time this season. And that's a very different message to what was there. I also told him to not mention the word anticipation. I told him to go from job and doing it well to instead to say, you know, the opposition might run and tackle a bit harder today, so you've just got to match it and get even better than it. And then talked about those 1%ers and everything else. And then I took out the inspiration and perspiration thing, and then I talked about the things that he wanted to remind them about the ruck play, how they should hit in D, etc., etc. And I talked to him about always telling the story to the players in event order. So if you're defending, for example, you picture yourself on the line, you picture the ball being played by the